5, 4, 3,
Quite quiet
2,
everywhere.
1, take out 3.
There are now an estimated 180 million television sets in the world, receiving pictures from 8,000 transmitting stations. 30 years ago, there were only 2 transmitters and a few hundred television sets. In association with the BBC, Mullard Limited present the story of how television began and of the people who made it happen just 30 years ago.
Television, 1966. This is the way it's done now, and this is the way it looks. But the picture was very different just 40 years ago. The first television images, transmitted a few feet across an attic room in Hastings, came from equipment that looked like this, and included a darning needle. Between then and now, television as we know it was discovered. But by whom? By the man who sent those pictures across the room in Hastings, or were there others? Who did discover television?
Baird, I imagine, yeah.
Baird.
Was it Robert Louis Stevenson? I've no idea.
John Baird. John Logie Baird.
I believe it was John Logie Baird.
John, was it Baird?
But was it John Logie Baird? It was he who sent those first flickering pictures in 1923, and it was Baird who first transmitted television programs on BBC transmitters. But the modern television system contains nothing, not one single piece of equipment or idea originated by John Logie Baird. So if it wasn't Baird, who did discover television? Was it this man? In 1908, he wrote a paper, then later made a speech outlining the theory of a television system more than 25 years before it came into existence. This man, perhaps. He did patent an electronic device for sending and receiving pictures as early as 1923. But the television system built and made to work in England wasn't his. For this man, he's been called a genius. Had he lived longer, he might have been the Faraday of his age. Or was it the man who arrived in England from Russia 3 weeks before the outbreak of the First World War? Which of these men did discover television? Let's start with this picture. It was sent along a wire that ran from Marseilles to Paris over 100 years ago in 1863 by the Abbé Caselli. He used this equipment. At the receiving end, it drew the picture onto tin foil. It wasn't just sending pictures that exercised the men who set out to invent television. It was sending moving pictures very quickly, many of them every second. One key to the problem turned up here in the tiny island of Valentia off the southwest corner of Ireland. This is where the Atlantic cable starts. In 1873, engineers were experimenting with submarine cables when they noticed something odd. They noticed that a substance called selenium, which they were using, was fluctuating in its resistance. At first, they thought the selenium was unreliable. Then one of the operators, called May, noticed the selenium's resistance was changing in direct relation to the sunlight shining upon it. May's chief, Willoughby Smith, sent off a report of the discovery to the scientific magazine Nature.
My dear Latimer Clark, I am sorry I shall not be able to attend the meeting of the Society tomorrow evening. If, however, you think this communication of sufficient interest...
The year was 1873, and it was a vital discovery. If a change in light caused a change in resistance, then by using the changing resistance, it was possible to transmit changes in light. It might be possible to see by electricity. Immediately, there was a flurry of schemes to do just that. Within 3 years, Alexander Graham Bell revealed his new invention for talking by electricity, the telephone. Soon there were schemes for linking the two in a seeing telephone. In America, this design for seeing by wireless was put forward by a man called Carey. In England, 2 scientists, Ayrton and Perry, claimed that the possibility had been known for some time to scientific men. And in 1881, Shelford Bidwell actually built an apparatus, this one still in existence, for transmitting pictures. In the 1880s, television, it seemed, was just around the corner. But somehow the corner was never turned. Although the inventors didn't know it, they were waiting for this, the valve. Thermionic valves were yet to be invented by Fleming. So was the new word that Thomson would add to the language, electronics. Without these, television could go no further. Their discovery marked the start of Phase 2. Within a few years, new developments occurred almost simultaneously in Russia, in England, and in the Kaiser's Germany. The Germany forged by Bismarck was driving ahead to become the leading industrial nation of the world. Out of that explosion of industrial energy, unobserved by most, came this, the cathode ray tube. It was perfected by Carl Braun in 1897, though not with the idea of a television tube in mind. Others saw its possibilities. In Russia, for instance, the Russia of the Tsars was already beginning to crumble. The smell of revolution persisted in the air. But none of the Russian masses, and none of those who enjoyed the privileged life at court, had any reason to know what was going on at the Technological Institute in St. Petersburg. It was there that one of the teachers, Boris Rosing, first suggested the use of the cathode ray tube as a television receiver. That was 1907. But Rosing's ideas remained theory. But studying with him was a young man who was to take Rosing's theory and later develop it in America. His name, Vladimir Zworykin. Over 50 years later, he recalls joining Rosing's laboratory.
Next Saturday, I joined him in his laboratory, which was in another building from the institute, and I found out he was working with television. Well, television was entirely new thing to me. I never heard about this thing. And besides, I found out he also working with entirely new type of television. I heard about Nipkow disc and how it's done and how impractical it was, but he tried to solve all these problems by using electronics from the beginning to the end. That means have the electronic eventual pickup tube and electronic reproduction tube.
In Germany, Braun's cathode ray tube. In Russia, Rosing's idea of using it for a television receiver. In Edwardian England, another contribution, and the most important of all. It was an England convinced that the golden age had been achieved and intent on enjoying the fruits of the first industrial revolution. Again, few were aware of the vigorous experimentation and inquiry going on in the new technologies, and particularly into the new science of electronics. In November 1911, the presidential address to the Roentgen Society was delivered by A.A. Campbell Swinton. In it, he expanded the ideas he had outlined 3 years earlier in a letter to Nature, a theoretical basis on which television could develop, and in fact was going to develop in the next 25 years.
Now, among the many scientific problems that await solution is that of distant electric vision. It's a problem of enormous difficulty. But that difficulty can possibly be overcome by the employment of two beams of cathode rays, one at the transmitting and one at the receiving station, synchronously deflected by the varying fields of two electromagnets placed at right angles to one another. The apparatus has never been constructed. Furthermore, I do not suppose for one moment it can be made to work without a great deal of experiment and probably much modification. It is indeed only an effort of my imagination.
When Campbell Swinton sat down, the blueprint for electronic television had been drawn. 3 years later, there arrived in England the man who was to lead the team that turned that blueprint into reality. On the money from an award from the Tsar, he came from Russia in July 1914 to study mathematics. But the outbreak of war cut him off from further funds, and he went to work at Marconi's in Chelmsford in their patent department. His name was Isaac Schoenberg. Only 8 years later, he was Marconi's general manager.